Israel headed to a two-front war? Is Lebanon, Hezbollah out of Lebanon, are they going to attack Israel and open a northern front? Or might Israel itself open up a northern front and launch a two-front war of its own? Those are some big questions, and we're not really sure what's going to happen right now, but the threat and the risk are going way up, both for the people in Lebanon and for the people in Israel, and continuing for the people in Palestine. To talk about this today, we have absolute best friend of the show, Matthew Ho, former State Department official, combat Marine, and just all-around good guy. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Danny. Thanks for having me back on.
I wish we could just sit here and sometimes it feels odd to just have a good time and just talk about things and laugh around when you've got so many things going on right now. Before we came on the air, we were talking about the fact that it's almost Christmas time, and how are the holidays going and all this, and it's just hard for me to really feel into that real Christmas spirit when we know that all these kids who the holidays are supposed to be for in Gaza and even still many in Ukraine as well, for that matter, but especially in Gaza, it's not even sure how many of those kids are going to be alive on Christmas Day, and that's a sobering thought.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this. You and I have studied this sort of thing our entire lives, and we've never seen anything like it. I think some of it's got to do with how we are able to see the video. We are able to see it in real time in a way that maybe we couldn't before. But a lot of it, I think, has to do with just the fact that these people are trapped and they are being massacred. This is an organized murder of people who are corralled and unable to escape. And it's being done with American support. I mean, we've given them 22. The Israelis have used 22,000 bombs that we have given them to kill. As of today, 18,000 people, about 8,000 of them being children. So, I mean, I think the fact that the holidays are going on, many of us are oblivious to that. We are, I think, in many ways pulled into this. We're watching this in a way that's probably not healthy for us. And then as soon as you say that, you think, well, that's nothing compared to what the people who are actually experiencing this going through. Yeah, but it is. This is I think many people, throughout the world are watching this, and the weight of it is enormous. It's overwhelming.
And in the United States, especially, some of the problem, I think, is that, you just got to be honest. Israel the government has done a tremendous job at marketing and continuing to give video escorts, provide commentary on all these things and presenting things in a fact that, all this is a righteous response to what happened on October 7th. And you would do the same thing if you were in our shoes. And they constantly talk about the cost that they have paid, which in many parts is legit and fair enough. And in fact, things did happen, but it's just egregiously overwrought in terms of the response, because the people in Palestine are just as innocent and deserving to live as their Israeli citizens that were killed. And yet there just doesn't seem to be much empathy for them there. And that's equally disturbing and disheartening for me.
Right. And you have spaces, in prominent spaces, members of Congress, the White House, major corporate media, that it's as if those who are advancing calls for ceasefires are the ones who have some type of agenda or are in some ways immoral. I've never seen this before, where there's a construct that exists, there's messaging that exists, that if you are calling for the end of if you're calling for the innocent people to stop being killed, then somehow you are wrong, you are immoral, you are the one who is trying to perpetuate something bad. And I've just never seen that before.
Well, earlier today, I saw a video made by Jack Keane on Fox News a couple of days back, where he's talking about, the ongoing war and this issue of calls for ceasefire. And they keep claiming, oh, well, that will just play into the hands of Hamas, as though Hamas is in some strong position. And all we got to do is get a little bit of ceasefire and bam, there's going to be another 10-7 or something like that.
Right.
No sense that all that's going to do is perpetuate. And I think you and I talked the last time you were on here that these kinds of mass destruction of the city and the wiping out of the capacity to sustain life afterwards, and the killing of so many thousands of people, wounding of tens of thousands more, is going to do nothing but create more intense chaos. It's going to create more enemies for Israel. It will not even come close to providing peace. And that's the really tragic part of me, is that for the Israeli civilians who want to be safe, this isn't going to do it for them. This is going to make it more unsafe for them. And we're just talking about the Gaza Strip here for the moment. That could be even worse. And here in a minute, we're going to talk about specifically the potential for a Northern Front war with Hezbollah. That is even worse. But just where we're at right now, that's one of the things that troubles me so much, is that this is just building the possibility for people to die on both sides well into the future.
Correct. It's and you had Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin in the last several days, or maybe last week it was, who spoke to that point, that a tactical victory is going to
strategic
is going to become a strategic defeat. Yeah, exactly. And that's what you're seeing here. I mean, Israel is quite capable. They're quite good at killing tens of thousands of Palestinians, at destroying Palestinian infrastructure, at making the land unlivable, making Gaza unlivable. And then where does that lead to? What is the outcome of that? How does that diminish the resistance to Israeli occupation? It doesn't. How does this separate Hamas from the people, in the sense that Hamas is answering the grievances of the occupied Palestinians? They are the resistance movement. How does this diminish a need for a resistance movement? It only strengthens it. And as we've discussed before, Danny, exactly, it doesn't just strengthen it, it probably makes it more extreme. So whatever follows Hamas, whether it has the same flag and banner and name, or it's something that is named differently, is more likely to be more extreme, to be more desperate, to be more driven by not just a desire and a quest for vengeance and revenge, but also to just a desperation to achieve some type of success, to have some kind of victory following this type of subjugation. So it really,
all they're doing is making it worse here. And unfortunately, I'm concerned that they may be about to make an even graver mistake, something that could cause even more problems, not just for the Palestinian people, not just for the Israeli citizens, but for the region, and possibly, God help us all, even American troops at some point, if things get completely out of control, which is far from a wild risk, as we're going to show here. So first of all, Matt, to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about before, first I want to look at a couple of reports that have been coming out that suggest that Israel is actually thinking not just of defending against a possible Hezbollah attack from the north, but maybe they should launch one of their own.
Israel is warning of a wider conflict if Hezbollah doesn't withdraw. In a show of force, Israeli warplanes fly over the Lebanese capital, Beirut. The Israeli military says if Hezbollah doesn't respond to diplomacy, it will have to impose a new reality to make Israelis feel safe to return to their homes in the north. Hezbollah is a stronger force than Hamas in Gaza, but so far it has been calibrating attacks to prevent a full-blown conflict.
The United States and France are trying to avoid a military escalation, sending envoys to Beirut to try to reach a diplomatic solution. Early in the war, the U.S. sent military assets to the region to deter Iran and its ally Hezbollah from attacking Israel. But now many fear Israel may widen the confrontation. Israeli media are reporting a possible deadline to reach a settlement with Hezbollah.
Now, just to clarify there, when they say they're seeking a diplomatic solution, in case you're not sure what the solution that they're trying to solve diplomatically is, Israel has recently given a warning to the Hezbollah that they must withdraw north of the Litani River, which is about 25 kilometers away from the Israeli border. And they say if they don't, then they may consider taking action. That was a condition of the end of the 2006 war, which basically hasn't been followed since that time. And it more looks like Israel's looking for a pretext to force Hezbollah back much further, because I can't see any chance that they're going to do that. But that's what they're talking about here. Now then we turn to what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying about this, and he seems pretty adamant.
Benjamin Netanyahu said Beirut would be left devastated if, like Gaza, if Lebanon-based Hezbollah started a war. Now, Netanyahu and his defense minister Yoav Gallant, accompanied with the chief of general staff, were briefed at the Army Northern Command, where he met staff officers and other soldiers.
כי אם חיזבאללה יבחר לפתוח במלחמה כוללת, אז הוא במו ידיו יהפוך את ביירות ואת דרום לבנון, לא רחוק מכאן, לעזה ולח'אן יונס.
Honestly, it seems he's a little too eager about turning Beirut into another Khan Yunis or Gaza City, which now Beirut's quite far north of that 25-kilometer zone. So let that sink in for a second. And then actually just moments before this broadcast started, we had Marwan Bishara, regional expert, explained the growing danger of a Northern Front war.
Even if Israel feels it's reached its goals in Gaza, are there elements in the military establishment that would say, okay, let's now turn to Hezbollah?
I do think that, and they, in fact, I've been listening to Israeli discussions, military strategic discussions about the day after in Gaza, and for them, it is not a two-state solution. The day after in Gaza is Lebanon. Once we finish with Gaza, we're going to have to focus on Lebanon. We can't focus on Lebanon now because we can't open two fronts. So once we are done with Gaza, whenever they are done with Gaza, then they say they wanted to focus on Lebanon because they don't want to be in the same position as they were on October 7, come whatever scenario with Lebanon. So they want to use the presence of the American aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines in the East Mediterranean in order to finish up their business with both Hamas and Hezbollah, both Gaza and Lebanon, both in Palestine and in the Middle East, in order just to basically ensure their interest. That will mean two things. Either they dictate their conditions to Hezbollah to move immediately north of the Litani River, which is quite north of the border with Israel, or they're going to carry a preemptive strike against Hezbollah, which will definitely mean a wider regional war, which will then implicate the United States, which I assure you, as I see you now, will mean Biden losing his elections.
Obviously, whether Biden wins or loses the election is not very high on my list of things to be concerned about, but having a wider war that could draw in the United States very much is. Is Marwan right, Matt? Do you think that Israel is basically in their mind saying, once we're finished in the South, we're going to move to the North?
I think so. On a personal level, I think he's one of the best commentators out there, Marwan Bishara. And I think he's absolutely right here in this case. Whether or not they will carry through with it, I think the idea is there, though. And we've seen it. I mean, hey, look, we've had this in our own histories. You know, when I got to Iraq in 2004 to what was soon to become the U.S. Embassy, it was the tail end of the Coalition Provisional Authority, the CPA, and still had people there in Baghdad at that time in April of 2004 who were talking about, well, once we get this straightened out here, we have to then decide, are we going to go left or are we going to go right? Meaning, are we going to go into Syria or are we going to go into Iran? I mean, this was 13, 14 months after the war had begun and people were still talking that way. So I think the idea of this as being a part of a larger campaign, that Gaza is phase one, Lebanon is phase two, fits into.
Matt, on that point there, just kind of as an aside, I actually had spoken to some people in the past while I was still on active duty that kind of echoed what you said there, that were it not for the rise of the insurgency in Iraq, right, had it been pacified, there was a very real possibility that we would have turned left or right, one or the other, and maybe ended up both. But that was completely derailed with the years-long insurgency that we had to slog through.
Right. And what you'd had at that point, not to get too into this topic, but at that point you had of course, the first battle of Fallujah, but you'd also previously had battles in Samarra and in Najaf, and you really had seen the pronounced nature the insurgency had really announced itself that winter, especially. And there were many in Baghdad, many in Washington, D.C., who, this is just, as Dick Cheney would say, the dead enders. We just got to tie up some loose ends. We got to, straighten some things out. And this will be all, and then we'll move on to what our next phase is. And, this idea of Israel having a phase 2 of Lebanon certainly fits into the view of many in Israeli government and Israeli military and Israeli society of the need for whether it's a Zionist type idea of creating the greater Israel, or it's a more of a national security type of ideal of having buffer zones.
Well,
So,
yeah, and toward that end, there was a comment by Mark Regev, the senior advisor to Netanyahu, recently said this.
Israeli people simply refuse to live any longer next to this terror enclave in constant fear that terrorists will cross the border in the middle of the night and murder their children. That's the bottom line. We have to end Hamas's rule of Gaza.
And you certainly understand that that's not just Gaza they're talking about. That's, I think, underscores Marwan's comment that once they're finished with Gaza, then they may move to the next, because it's hard to imagine them being, okay, we got rid of this, and though I don't think that will actually happen, but then that they would be okay with keeping the Hezbollah on the northern border with their rockets and whatever else. It's just hard to imagine them saying, yeah, we're going to stop there.
Exactly. Particularly too, if you bring in some Israeli domestic political concerns, Netanyahu and his government is in a very fraught position. Netanyahu has got approval ratings that make Biden and Trump look like Beyonce and Taylor Swift by comparison, right? I mean, so, I saw something last week that the trust of the Israeli people in Netanyahu is 4%. So, right. I mean, so the idea that Netanyahu is a dead man walking, that as soon as this crisis is over, he will be removed from office. Well, there's now there's some, reason politically to continue this war. Once it dies down in Gaza, and the Israelis are saying that could be in a couple months or a year, really don't know, but then continue the war into Lebanon, because that allows the crisis to remain, and that keeps us in power. So there's those calculations that are in play here too. But yeah, certainly this idea that they are going to let this opportunity go away, that they are going to not take this opportunity to achieve goals that they have, whether they, again, be the expansion of Israel or creating a legitimate security buffer. The time is now to do that.
Okay, let's consider some of the ramifications and the possibility of what the ramifications may be, what the results could be in the area. Let's take a look at, first of all, at our Arab allies or our Arab friends in the region, whether that's Egypt, Jordan, UAE, or Saudi Arabia even, and those are various levels of friends depending on the conditions or the days at the time. But when the United States recently vetoed that, there was the sole veto voice to not have a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, even our ally France made a pretty bold rebuke on this floor against the United States, against our actions here. And Saudi Arabia was also very disheartened by that, or angry rather by that. If Israel actually launches an attack into Hezbollah, what do you think that the issue is going to be, or the response is going to be from, let's say, Egypt and Jordan? Are they going to be okay with that? Is Saudi Arabia going to be okay with that and just allow Israel to continue to go on?
No, they're not going to be okay with that. And but that is getting to the point that was just said by Marwan on Al Jazeera that you posted there. This idea that we've got 2 carrier battle groups in the region. We doubled the amount of our strike aircraft in the region, right? Doubled the amount of F-16 and F-15 and A-10 squadrons we have in the region. And that is that availability then, that is part of the Israeli calculation, that American presence is going to serve as a deterrent or a hedge from other nations getting involved. And particularly, you talk about Syria and Iran getting involved militarily if Israel attacks Hezbollah in Lebanon. But you have then this, what about the Arab nations, as you have brought up, and certainly for their own interests, say the Turks as well too. You know, that just means greater instability in the region. That means, you know, particularly say for Turkey, the possibility of refugees coming into their country. I mean, so this on the face,
Right. So let's
nothing
actually
anyone
shift
wants.
over. Let's shift over to Turkey, because there's more than just even the political instability if refugees come in there. But, you know, Erdogan has been pretty outspoken, and graphically so, against Israel and against Netanyahu personally. You know, he's made some pretty big threats so far, just on the early stages of this war in Gaza. Do you have any idea or any insights into what he may do if Israel actually expands the war? We'll start with Turkey first.
I think what you would see is, I don't believe you'd see the Turks put their own troops into Lebanon, but the Turks, I think, would certainly support resistance to an Israeli invasion in a way that they hadn't before. So you'd have not just Iranian, Iraqi, and Syrian support for a coalition in Israel and in Lebanon against Israel, but also Turkish support as well, which would be unique to see, right? Because you have the Turks coming alongside the same people that they were fighting in Syria, right? I mean, so you'd have these, you could potentially see these Sunni factions with these Shia factions fighting against the Israelis. The thing for me about the Turks, though, is that the Turks can't do anything militarily because of Israel's nuclear weapons. You know, the Israelis have, you know, 100, 300, 500 nuclear weapons. No one really seems to ever put.
Do you think that they would really consider using them against Turkey if
well, it's a deterrent, though, right? It's a deterrent. So the idea of
it'd be a risk one way or the other.
It'd be a risk one way or the other. But for me, the concern is that this is a reason for, an impetus for Turkey to get a nuclear weapon. And the Pakistanis in the past have said, hey, we will give the Turks a nuclear weapon. And so, I mean, is this right? I mean, this type of escalation of a nuclear arms race coming out of this. And then you do get to the point, well, if the Turks get a nuclear weapon, why won't the Saudis? And why doesn't, okay, why won't the Egyptians get a nuclear weapon then? And then if you then have that type of nuclear parity, do you then have the willingness of those nations to confront Israel with conventional military forces that they would not because of Israel's nuclear capabilities, right? So the idea then, if you do have a nuclear-powered Saudi Arabia, a nuclear-powered Turkey, a nuclear-powered Egypt, would you then see the Egyptian Navy taking the Israeli Navy on the high seas kind of thing? Right. I mean, so that's where my fear where this goes to, where it starts to get very, very, not, I mean, it's incredibly horrific now, but where it starts to get very worrisome in the sense
of the expanding impact,
the expanding nature of it,
humanity, not just the people here.
And this is the reason why I think the Israelis, you know, Marwan's point, why the Israelis will want to utilize this time, because with the presence of the Americans and the support from the Americans, they have that hedge. No one else is going to intervene as long as the Americans are there, and so they know it's a.
We'll see if that plays out, because I can see people wanting to say, yeah, I'm not convinced that you will use it. I think it's just putting a bunch of, you know, threats up in the air, but I bet you're really not going to use them. Whether we would or not is a separate issue, but I see people being more and more willing to test us out and say, will you really do that?
Right.
Yeah, because I think people are just getting in the region. A lot of people are getting more desperate and more less risk averse, so that they may be testing those kind of things, which of course leads to the possibility that then if you're tested, either you back down or you escalate and then potentially get yourself into bigger. That's one of my bigger concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're witnessing, they feel that these Arab nations, the Turks, the Iranians, they feel powerless watching what's occur in Gaza, watching that organized murder, that ethnic cleansing. They're unable to stop it. Their people are very angry. They have been betrayed, or not betrayed, but the double standard, the hypocrisy of the Americans is something that they are fed up with. So, you know, do you get to the point where they do say, you know what, so be it. At least history will say we did something about this, right? At least history said we did something. We didn't stand by meekly.
That's a concern. Real quickly, let's go to the other kind of elephant in the room that everybody loves to talk about, and so many in America salivate about the possibility of, what about Iran? If their main ally, Hezbollah, gets into an actual conflict with Israel, what would Iran do? Because I think that under any circumstances, they would prefer, if ever given the chance, to avoid a direct confrontation with the United States. But would they, as you suggested, Turkey might get more involved in other ways?
I think it'd be similar to what the Iranians did in Syria, right? Providing large amounts of militia forces, including Iraqi and Syrian forces, providing the leadership for that. And then, of course, providing, the weapons and munitions, what intelligence they can provide. So being in a very supportive role of Hezbollah, including, helping to provide tens of thousands more fighters.
Yeah. But if that happens, you're going to have the Jack Keens that are all over the news channels screaming, aha, see, they did that. Now we have to strike them. If we don't strike directly at the IRGC or right into Tehran, then this is going to whatever. You see that would come, don't you think?
I think so, but I think the fact is that the American military is way too overextended for the Pentagon to go along with that, right? So I think the idea of right, I would hope, exactly, I would hope, and the fear of the American military, and we have to remember too that when it comes down to it, when you look and you see what's the priority in Washington D.C., it keeps coming back to China. So they want to keep as much powder dry for China as possible. But then, of course, this also, though, is involving Israel. And we saw how quickly Ukraine was put in its place when this happened 2 months ago. So you have these competing priorities and these competing ideologies in Washington, D.C. that would have which would they prefer to go for? Which war do they want more? And a war with Iran, what could be something that would derail the possibilities of your future war with China. But it's all madness. I mean, we're speculating here about people who are.
It's crazy because I think you're right.
Yeah, but we are. I mean, and that's one of the things, like when we look at Netanyahu, the clip you played of him, we can't look at him as some type of rational, calculating actor. He is in many ways, but he's also a man who believes he is, as Tolstoy called it, a hero of history, right? He believes that he has an outsized, a mass effect on history in a way that normal people do not. I mean, we have to also remember too that with the Israelis, so much of their policies are influenced by their far-right ultra-nationalist religious zealots who really do believe these things. And just as we have people in our Congress who really are supportive of Israel because they believe this is the way to pave the path for the second coming of Jesus. They actually believe this. We can't ever discount those types of things. We look back on history and we can see that in people, the megalomania, the craziness, everyone. I mean, General Haig during the First World War used to conduct seances. And big shot, he got 20,000 of his people killed at one time in one day. I mean, but you look at this and you understand it in a historical sense that people can have very outsized impacts on world events due to their own personal peculiarities, due to their own egos, due to their own belief systems. And so I think that arrogance you saw, the pride where Netanyahu says we will turn Beirut into Khan Yunis, was, that's a reflection of who he really is and what he actually believes. He wasn't just puffing his chest out for the camera.
Yeah,
he really believes that.
Yeah, I think that he would actually make good on that. Well, in the last few minutes we have here, Matt, I love to put people on the stage here, but what would you recommend to Biden right now that he should do to ensure American national interest and to try to keep this contained, because there's so much pressure on him. And if we had time, I would have shown you another clip of where he was saying earlier today, I think it was, or maybe it was yesterday, that, no, we have to keep supporting Israel because there's political pressure on him to do so. But if he said, you know what, forget about political pressure, I'm just going to do what's right and what's best for America, and he was asking your advice, what should he do given Israel's desires and what their likely intentions are? What would you say if you were behind the scenes?
I would tell him he needs to stop the slaughter, needs to stop the organized murder for all the reasons we discussed, the moral horror of it, but as well too the strategic folly of it, what this is going to create, what's going to come from this. And then as well, look, you can keep your carrier battle groups in the region as a guarantor of peace, if you will, if you want. But the real thing is you have all the leverage on the Israelis, force them to the table. And of course, you know, you have to find some type of political accommodation, some type of political negotiation. He needs to abandon his own domestic political concerns, his own concerns about the impact of the Israeli lobby here on American politics, and move forward in a way that tries to bring about some type of negotiated settlement, some type of real peace, you know, for the creation of a Palestinian state, you know, some type of resolution of this 100-year-long conflict that really comes down to land ownership. I mean, that's what he needs to do in order to find a, you know, and not if he were to do that, even if he were to fail, he will go down in history as the man who attempted to do that. But
you know, he keeps saying with words a lot, two-state solution, two-state solution. But of course, he takes no action on it and doesn't use any of those levers we have. And the thing that concerns me most, Matt, is my worry that in saying, well, I'm worried about my domestic political issues and keeping my base and to keep the Israelis happy and make sure that they stay safe, I'm following this path of basically letting the Israeli government do whatever it wants to do. They may perversely end up harming our interest, the Israelis' interest, and more people in the Palestine. I mean, it's like the triple threat in the worst direction, because I don't see any prospect of him actually showing the leadership necessary to bring this to a conclusion.
Right. It just exasperates the situation. I mean, the horrors we're seeing now will be revisited with further horrors. I mean, violence will beget violence. I mean, that is what happened on October 7th was inevitable. That if you're going to occupy a people, there will be violent resistance against it. Until you take away that occupation, unless you subjugate them and ethnically cleanse the area, which I think is what the Israelis really are trying to accomplish.
Certainly some of them want to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So openly, it's not even a secret.
Yeah, right. I mean, so this idea that you're exactly right is that this makes everybody less safe. The Israelis will never be able to sleep at night. The Palestinians will continue to suffer. And as Americans, we continue to hollow out our economy by having this empire around the world that is based on 20th century principles. And, you know, we can get into that. We could do a whole show on that, right? But I mean, where are our interests being met? How does this make us more safe? You know, I mean, all the opportunity costs of having to have $15 billion, you know, well, we have $15 billion aircraft carriers, right? I mean, opportunity costs of all of that to maintain our role as, you know, and what is it accomplishing? It's not even as if there's a peace. It's not even if there's stability. It's getting worse and worse, more fractious, because
it's like that Eisenhower speech in 1953. That's
it is, you know, and the thing is, like, as we try and maintain control, as America tries to maintain control, it's making things worse. So the harder it grabs onto something, right, it causes more fractures and fissures and more pressure, you know, and that has a counter reaction. And that's what we're seeing throughout the world.
Yeah, we are. And we'll have to leave it right there for now. This will, unfortunately, be an issue that's going to continue on. And we at Daniel Davis Deep Dive are going to continue to hit this hard every day to dig in, to give you the truth, the real story about what's going on, just like we did here today. And we ask you guys to come and join us this afternoon at 3 o'clock. We have Doug McGregor, who's going to talk about the real story going on with Zelensky's visit here in town today with President Biden on the Russia-Ukraine war, which has its own version of reality and unreality that you need to get penetrated through. We will see you at 3 o'clock for that. And for now, thanks, Matt Ho, for coming on. And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.